Now, our next speaker is Bleeker. Annie, I think, needs very little introduction to a CDAT audience. Annie's been working in the field of alcohol and other drugs for more than 27 years, which reminds me is about the age that most rock stars die. Thankfully, she's very much alive, yes. Annie was made in Holland, but born in Australia. Besides working in policy, research and education in Australia, she's also worked overseas in Indonesia, in the Netherlands, in Kazakhstan, Thailand and Turkey. She's currently working as a consultant in the AOD field across the state and beyond. And some of you might remember her as the face behind the ADF Breaking the Ice project that finished last year. Annie is passionate about social justice and about seeing the removal of stigma and discrimination towards people who use drugs. And today she's going to share some of her knowledge and experience in the past, gathered in the past, and present from an international and Australian perspective. So please welcome Annie.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, everybody, for that warm welcome. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the wonderful people on whose land we're meeting on today, and pay my respects to future generations as well as past generations, and extend that also to any Aboriginal people in the room today. Today's talk is, I guess, an informal history. I'm now at the stage where I have to wear glasses, unfortunately. It's not a formal history, but rather a journey through experience and culture of drug use in this country, mainly since colonisation. I guess I'm interested in what history can teach us about our desire for drugs and how that shapes our trends now. As many of you know, Australia's got a long history of drug use. Aboriginal Australians use pitchery in a similar way to chewing tobacco to alleviate hunger, fatigue, as well as pain. And most of us will remember that, well not remember, but know the history of the colonisation of this country, and with that came a lot of rum and a lot of alcohol, which has continued to be a very integral part of our socialisation process in Australia today. And as we've heard quite a lot this morning, it continues to be our biggest drug problem in a lot of ways. So, I'm interested in why Australians are some of the biggest drug users in the world. If you look at our statistics, it's sent every year to the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, and top of the pubs comes Australians. That's related to our ecstasy use and particularly our illicit drug use. And what I find fascinating about that is that we spend 4 to 7 times more generally on our illicit drugs, but also our legal drugs, and still we end up being biggest drug users. While prices being very prohibitive for tobacco, it isn't so with illegal drugs. All right, so as we're going the wrong way again. Okay, so as we know, drugs have been around for many millennia. Ephedra, which was first found in a burial site 50,000 years before Common Era, is basically a natural form of amphetamines. You can see that alcohol was used a lot later, and in fact in the Bible is one of the first stories about Noah getting drunk and showing his nakedness, which is actually the first recorded story of public drunkenness in the world. So you can see many of these drugs were actually naturally found in nature, and one of the reasons why they think humans first tried drugs is they observed the impact that they had on animals. Particularly, there's a legend about the Ethiopian shepherds seeing their goats eating coffee seeds and seeing that they got quite animated through that and thought that sounds like a good idea, might keep us awake. And that's one of the theories about why humans first started drugs. Many of these drugs were initially used very much in ritual situations and religious ceremonies, but also for medicines later. And it's interesting to see now that cannabis is actually coming back now to be used again medicinally. Okay, now, what drug is this? This was written about 120 years ago. I find it fascinating to look at, and I really want to kind of take you a little bit through a kind of case history of drugs, Believe it or not, this is a drug that about 90% of you consumed this morning. It's caffeine. It was written 110 years ago, and you can sort of see how vilified this drug was through our culture, and now it is our most popular drug. When I showed this definition to my dad, he goes, "That's not a drug." And I said, "Well, actually, it is." In 1475, Turkish law made it legal for a husband to divorce his wife. For a wife to divorce her husband if he refused her coffee. In 1700s, King Charles banned coffee houses because they were salacious beds of hot gossip. The ban lasted for a week. This guy hated, This guy hated coffee so much, tea actually, this was about tea, and this was in the 1700s he wrote about it, and you can see the last bit, that a pest for her employer and a curse for her husband if any man be so unfortunate as to fix his affections upon her. So again, the moralisation of drug users sort of has been something that has been with us for quite a long time, and coffee was certainly one of the first ones. William Corbett hated caffeine because basically it was replacing the beer market at the time, and beer was something that people could brew themselves at home, whereas coffee they had to pay twice as much, tea they had to pay twice as much for. Okay, so basically once we get into the 19th century, we can fast forward quite a lot, we can see that many of those natural substances were synthesised into person-made or man-made products. Morphine, laudanum, which is a combination between alcohol and opium, was freely available. Cocaine was unregulated and sold for many, many ailments, from sort of coughs to soothing teeth problems for soothing infants, etc. Smoking opium was imported into Australia through the Chinese, and some of our first drug laws were actually, again, very racially motivated against the Chinese, who were actually smoking opium. They didn't mind about white Australians using heroin for pharmaceutical purposes, but they didn't like the Chinese do it. And legal measures against opium were established in about 1857, and that was when our first drug laws came into effect. If we, and here we can see, and Australians were actually the highest consumers of heroin up until 1953, and they were forced by the US and many of our drugs bans to actually make it illegal. Now what's interesting now when we come to later in the presentation is looking at pharmaceutical use of drugs, and I think that's quite sort of fascinating. So let's skip to the 20th century. Many of you know that in the 1960s, 1970s, this is really where the concept of recreational drug use came in. And many bans were actually put in place before cannabis even became a problem in about 1950s. So we know cannabis became quite widespread, LSD was used, and many Western countries certainly acknowledged that they had drug problems. We know the infamous war on drugs, which has been with us for over 50 years and is not necessarily getting great results. And then we had Australia certainly had some really good changes, and one of the first countries in the world to adopt harm minimisation as our approach to drug use, which was revered all around the world, which is a good thing. So what I want to do is just look at current drug trends, and I guess the first one I want to start off with is smoking, because this is something that Australia has done very well at. I don't know if there are many smokers in the room now, but certainly if you want to buy a packet of cigarettes today, a packet of Rollies will set you back $70, and a packet of other cigarettes will set you back about $35. Interesting to say, for a gram of, you'll pay $70 for a gram of cocaine in the Netherlands, and you'll pay $70 for a packet of cigarettes here. We still have double the levels of use of cocaine users. Okay, let's look at smoking first, and I guess I've got a question mark on it because we've actually done a very good job in Australia in getting the white, rich people to stop smoking. Well, we haven't done so well as some other groups. So in 1945, around the end of the war, almost 3/4 of Australian males smoked, and about 1/4 of the of the female population. By the 1970s, with women's liberation, yay, we got the girls to smoke as well. And you can see that our rates have actually not reduced as much amongst female smokers as they have amongst male smokers. So we're down around 15% for men now and about 11% for women. Our goal in Australia is to get to 9% of the population smoking by 2020. We're actually probably not going to make that, particularly because if we look at the data on the last part, bottom half of this slide, where the groups that really need some more intensive intervention. So we have seen in the last 10 years an increase in the amount of people smoking roller cigarettes, about a 10% increase since 2007. We have also seen the increase in e-cigarettes. This has been a fairly controversial area in Australia. Very good for harm minimisation. Obviously we need to be careful that we don't get new markets and new people taking it up. We've also seen the use of shisha, and that's sort of often seen as better for you because it's flavoured tobacco. Well, if there's one thing you take away today, an hour on the shisha pipe will deliver the equivalent of about 100 cigarettes. So don't think that you're actually doing the right thing. So we still have daily smoking with 4 out of 10 Aboriginal people continue to smoke. 1 out of 5 of the poorest people in Australia. People that are living in very remote areas, also quite high levels of use. 7 out of 10 people, men with mental health issues, or 6 women with mental health issues, and 8 out of 10 people that are on opiate substitution therapy. If we want to change this, we certainly need to look at expanding prevention programs. One of the ideas that's coming very much and showing a lot of promise in the States and over in Europe is actually paying people to stop smoking. In the US, they've found that if they pay people up to $1,000 American, they're 1.6 times more likely to give up. Where they've paid over in Switzerland and in Europe, given up to $2,000 for people to quit smoking, they've found it's 2.6 times more likely to quit. So that's what I'd like to sort of see rolled out in that area. Okay, alcohol. We've heard a bit about alcohol this morning. Jeff's going to actually talk to you a bit more about alcohol. And I think it's been well established that we love our grog in Australia. The 6 o'clock swill pretty well set up our binge drinking. So this was enforced around the end of the First World War, and it was actually only taken out of South Australia in 1967, still in my lifetime. That basically meant that pubs closed at 6 o'clock, so everyone had to drink and drink and drink until they fell over, and then came back and did often terrible things to their partners as well during this time. Okay, fluctuating patterns in the last 50 years. We are number 16th in the world for drinking. We used to be in the top 10, so we're doing something right, which is a good thing. Our consumption levels were the highest in around the mid-70s at about 13 litres of pure alcohol per capita. We're now down to about 9 litres, well, around 10 litres. The main drinking preference for young people is spirits or ready-to-drinks. For adults, it's beer, and for females, it's actually wine. Costs, I'm not going to labour on this, you would have seen this quite a lot, but it costs us twice as much as illicit drug use, even though our concern is often much more about the illicits, and we forget about this one. My dad even said to me, it's not even really a drug, is it, as he was sipping his wine. I said, yes, Dad, it is. It's responsible for 70,000 assaults, 24,000 of domestic violence, and it's the major cause of death and injury for many older Australians. And particularly if we look at trends amongst older Australians with drinking, it's my age group, the problematic drinkers. So 85% of people have ever tried it in Australia. This is data coming from the National Drug Strategy Household Survey, which is conducted every 3 years in Australia. It gives us really good information about legal drug trends. Illegal drugs, it's also kind of strong for, but we need to also look at other surveys to see what's going on there. So you can see almost 8 out of 10 Australians used the drug last year. Less people, we had some good wins here in 2016, less people drank alcohol in quantities that exceeded the lifetime risk, which is over 2 standard drinks a day, which is good. However, we've got more people in their 50s, that's my age group, consuming 11 or more standard drinks on one occasion. Obviously I'm not one of those, but certainly there are people. This is really what's concerning me, I guess, the figures at the bottom. You know, this was some new research that came out last week from the National Drug Research Institute in Perth. We know that we've had around 5,000 to 6,000 deaths a year. 6,000 deaths a year, 2,000 of those are directly attributed to cancer. Now, the links between cancer and smoking have been really well established, and it's 30 years that it's been classed as a class 1 carcinogen alcohol, and hardly anyone knows that. So there's, and basically even our like daily limits of 2 standard drinks a day. So, okay, one standard drinks a day has been linked to breast cancer risk for women, increased by 5%, and premenopausal, postmenopausal up to 10%. So we really need to be doing some more on that. It also gives us 400 hospitalisations a day. Okay, young people, they're doing great things with alcohol. A lot of them, not all of them, but certainly we're seeing more people abstaining. If we look at young adults, we've got, again, some really good wins there, reducing levels of drinking. But this, we've got 13% of deaths in the 14 to 17-year-old age groups, which is attributed to alcohol. That's really concerning. We also have young people accessing accident and emergency at twice the rate of any other age group. So despite the fact that some of them are doing well, others are not. So we've got this kind of paradox happening where the light drinkers are drinking less and the heavy drinkers are drinking more. In fact, you know, the top 10% of drinkers now account for about 50% of the alcohol consumed in Australia. When we look at that around illicit drugs, it's usually the top 10% of users consuming about 90% of the drugs in Australia. So with alcohol, it's a little bit more spread. So alcohol consumption's actually dropped, but overall harms have increased. Okay, going to quickly look at illegal drug trends. Basically, I'm going to use again the household data survey here. I've still got alcohol on this graph, but the main drug that's increased in Australia is cocaine. Now, traditionally, we haven't had a lot of cocaine in this country, but that has doubled in the last 10 years, the amount of people trying that. We're one of the most expensive countries to buy cocaine. It's up to $300 to $350 a gram, and the purity is about 20 to 30%. But you know, we still like it. The other issue of concern, which I want to take you through, is the illicit use of pharmaceutical drugs, and that's increased quite substantially in the last 15 years. So just some trends. So young people under the age of 30, they're drinking, they're doing less drugs, and you know, than they were in 2001. However, this cohort of 40, 50 to 60-year-olds are continuing to be problematic. In the, what's happened? Did I do that?
No, sorry, it's me.
Now you have to give me a minute back. Okay, thanks. So we've got people's 40s, 50s and 60s showing some harm, particularly around alcohol and their cannabis consumption. The highest proportions of data users of cannabis are the over 40s, it's not the young people. So while we've had recent methamphetamines, we're talking about all forms of methamphetamine has decreased, the proportion of people using ice has increased. So that's why we're starting to see more hospitalisations, more death, more demands on treatment centres, etc. Interestingly, for the first time in about 15 years, we've seen ecstasy use decrease and cannabis use has been stable. Cannabis use started declining in Australia in many Western countries in the late 90s, and a lot of that was the smoking legislation that increased that. We have increased availability of research drugs. So we, under the conventions that drugs are made illegal here, we have 44 drugs, I think, that are legal. Of the research chemical drugs that are trying to copy the effects of those drugs, there's now 644 of those available. Thankfully, the prevalence rates of that is quite low in Australia. More people are buying drugs, though, through the dark web. For the first time in the community, we saw methamphetamine seen as a bigger problem than alcohol, which I find quite concerning. I'm not going to go over the meth stuff, that's in our presentations, and some of you have sort of seen it before, but these are some of the reasons it continues to be a problem, particularly in poor communities and regional areas, and also a lot of Aboriginal communities are suffering a lot with this. Okay, opiate tests. Look at this. This is from 2000 right through to 2014. You can see that the vast majority of people dying in 2000 was heroin related. let's go right to 2014. What do you notice there? The vast majority of people that are overdosing is for pharmaceutical opioids, up to 70% of them. What is interesting here is that you can sort of see on the slides, got to be weird and back. You can see here that actually, this I don't have to, that's different. Most people didn't have an IDU history, and a lot of the people were actually suffering from chronic pain. Okay, so what's happened in that time? We probably won't be as bad as America, but we're getting. Bryony Lawrence, who's a good friend of mine and a researcher in this field, I sort of said to her, tell me yes or no, are we going to get as bad as America? And she said, probably not as bad as America, but we're certainly sort of heading that way. So we've seen an increase in dispensing. We've seen a marked increase from sort of weaker opioids to the stronger opioids being used, and that's also, again, more likely to get dependent on it. Opiate hospital admissions increasing, treatment seeking increasing, and overdose increasing. So, as I said before, about 70% of the people that are overdosing are people on pharmaceutical opioids. Crypto markets, Australians again, we are the second biggest vendors on crypto markets after the Netherlands. Whenever I say I'm from Holland, everyone goes, ooh, big drug problem over there. No, come and live in Australia. That's certainly where we are. So we're big users of it, but we're also quite big vendors of it, the second. So this is actually, many of you will know, this is what happens underneath the World Wide Web, it's the dark web. This is what it looks like. Now, I just want to point out here, so this was established in 2011, you can see up the top there that there were 485 drugs listed in 2011. This website was shut down a couple of years ago by the FBI, but it was certainly the most stable drugs market. Then we've got Alpha Bay, which is another quite popular one. So it's a bit of cat and mouse that happens with these. This is one of the most popular ones now, but I want to draw your attention to the top of the slide there. What do you see? By March, so this is almost a year ago, 2,115 different drugs. Now, the guy who set up Silk Road was very ethical and didn't want to sell weapons and all of that, but here you can see that there's weapons available, there's fraud, whatever else. So there you go. So I guess just to finish with smoking, I'd like to see the expansion of new treatments and a consistent effort. I think one of the good things that we've done with smoking that we haven't done with alcohol is we remind people every month that it's bad for you. And we've got sponsorship of alcohol all over the place, so we've sort of, I think financial incentives would be a good way to start, particularly because it's a lot of poorer communities using it. With alcohol, it's fantastic to see the voluntary tax introduced a couple of weeks ago in the NT. It'd be great if that would be expanded across the rest of Australia. Personally, I'd like to see health messages on bottles, not that that will create behaviour change, but it will certainly make people more educated about alcohol, and particularly the cancer risks. And illicit drugs, as I said in the beginning, reduce stigma. We can't, support, don't punish people. Expand treatment, and for God's sake, Australia, can we introduce drug checking? It's been 25 years, it's been in Europe, and we still haven't had it done here. The other thing I'd like to see with opioids is obviously better training for GPs in their community. We need to probably do real-time dispensing with that. We need to look at different ways for people to manage pain rather than giving them cancer opioids. And I'd also like to see the provision of naloxone or Narcan to pay patients, particularly those that are at risk with family members. And I guess these people said it better than I. I'd like to see an end of the war on drugs and certainly an approach to different ways of looking at this issue. Thanks for your time. Sorry, someone wants to take a photo of that. There you go. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to acknowledge these people who are good friends of mine, but also provided a lot of the content for the research and the work I've done before me. Thank you.